I regret to inform you that this week another game has joined the Amazon Studios graveyard. This is well-worn territory here on my channel, but here's a quick reminder of how things have gone for the developer so far. They had their big reveal back in 2016. They released this trailer showcasing 3 games that they had in production. There was Crucible, a multiplayer hero shooter where 2 teams would fight to compete in various objectives. There was New World, a PvP-focused sandbox MMO with open world conflict where you could steal loot from other players, and then Breakaway, a multiplayer brawler that from the start was aiming to be a competitive esport. Breakaway was canceled, Crucible released was bad, got unreleased into beta, then got canceled, and New World has been hit with delay after delay as they swapped focus from a sandbox PvP to a more traditional theme park MMO. Now also within this timeline, back in 2019, we learned that in a partnership with LOTRO, Amazon would be leading development of this brand new Lord of the Rings MMO. At this point, the game has been well along into development and was tentatively planned to release in 2023, which brings us to today. Just this week, we got the announcement that this Lord of the Rings MMO has been canceled. just another Amazon game getting canceled. Now, given their history, it'd be easy to jump on Amazon for another failed attempt at making or releasing a game, but apparently from what we know, this time around, it actually doesn't look to be Amazon's fault as to why this game isn't going to see the light of day. I want to dive into that here in this video, but first, let's get a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Darkfire Heroes, a brand new free-to-play mobile RPG that offers strategic combat, PvP brawls, epic boss fights, and plenty of heroes to collect. The game launched just recently, and anyone who wants to join now will receive a special limited edition bonus for the first 7 days. Some of the game's features include the ability to collect, upgrade, and play as powerful common, rare, and epic heroes. There's a big campaign to explore with different levels, enemies, and challenges to overcome. You'll battle your way through armies of deadly monsters and ghouls, and face off against challenging bosses in real-time strategic RPG combat that tests your skills and gives epic rewards. There's also multiple styles of PvP in the game, including Castle Conquest, where you real-time battle to destroy your opponent's castle, and Hero Race, where you might have guessed you race through a stream of enemies to see who can reach the end first. Both of these PvP arenas offer daily rewards as well as new ways to try out different combos. So if you're interested in checking out Darkfire Heroes for yourself, there's a special download link in the description below that supports my channel. And with that, let's get back to the video. Okay, so let's start off by going over everything that we've known about the Lord of the Rings MMO up until this point, because it's actually all important as to what's behind the cancellation of this game. So we actually first learned about the Lord of the Rings MMO back in 2018. There was a reveal from Athlon Games, a developer and publisher of exclusively free-to-play console and PC games, and also they're a subsidiary of LOTRO Technologies. Now, the company had signed a long-term licensing agreement with Middle-earth Enterprises to make this Lord of the Rings MMO, and at the time, they said that they were going to be working with an unannounced studio to develop the game. And then 1 year later, in the summer of 2019, we learned that Amazon Games was going to be that studio. They would be the primary developer and had a team of industry veterans very familiar with MMO and live service games. They had members who had worked on titles like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, Rift, Defiance, and Destiny. Now, the Lord of the Rings MMO in particular, according to Athlon's website, would be an engrossing new AAA experience set at a time long before the events of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and would explore lands, people, and creatures never seen before by fans of the Tolkien universe. And then the last big thing that we knew was that the game was being built on the Lumberyard engine, which was Amazon Game Studios' engine. This would be a free-to-play game and would be coming to PC and consoles. We also learned about their release schedule. Last December, LOTRO was purchased by Tencent, and as a result of that, some documents came out that showed the production schedule for the game. Apparently in June 2020, they had completed their first pass of the game's art and races and classes. They planned to have a draft of the game's lore and narrative done by January of this year. They wanted a playable prototype for June of this year, and they were aiming to begin the closed beta in September 2022, and open beta in January 2023, and then releasing later in 2023, first coming to PC and then later coming to consoles. So with the game first being revealed in 2018 by Athlon, the full release scheduled for 2023, it puts them in line with the typical MMO development cycle of 4 to 5 years. And again, partway through that process, we learned that it was actually going to be Amazon leading and taking control of the primary development, especially given the fact that the game's engine was the engine that Amazon owns, Lumberyard. So that's everything we've known about the Lord of the Rings MMO up until this point. Now, news of the game's cancellation came this week from a Bloomberg article. A few key bits of information from that article. They start off by mentioning that the game was in development at Amazon Studios alongside Leyou Technologies, and that Leyou was purchased by Tencent last December. Like I talked about, that production schedule actually came as part of that purchase, and things getting shuffled in between. Those negotiations, specifically, they say the resulting contract negotiations led to a dispute between Amazon and Tencent that eventually caused the game's cancellation. An Amazon spokesperson confirmed that after Tencent's acquisition of Leyou, we have been unable to secure terms to proceed with the title at this time. The Amazon team that was working on the game would be moved on to other projects, and the spokesperson also said that we love the Lord of the Rings IP and are disappointed that we won't be bringing this game to customers. So we don't know the specifics of like exactly where the issues were, just that after Tencent purchased Leyou, they couldn't come to any sort of an agreement to continue development. Now, there's a few things that this could be sticking around. This could be a financial disagreement, a creative disagreement, or a development disagreement. Like maybe Tencent wanted a higher cut of the total sales once this game was eventually released, or maybe they wanted more control over the game's content, or maybe they wanted to shift the primary development away from Amazon to another studio. We just don't have any of those specifics. But regardless, this situation is far different from the previous Amazon cancellations, where they simply couldn't get their games in a good enough state to release or to continue development. This time, the game's getting canceled simply due to failed negotiations. I think we can also not ignore the elephant in the room that this continues the, I don't know, what I would call somewhat worrying trend of Tencent getting involved in the production of games, the ownership of games. I mean, at this point, it feels like they've got their hand in the pot of a huge majority of a lot of the games companies out there, developers, publishers, whoever. Tencent's got some sort of a stake in everything, and they are affecting the development of these games. I mean, again, we don't know the specifics. We don't know where and how exactly these agreements fell through, but for it to get to the point where Amazon would just be like, no, we're just going to stop production of this game because we can't reach an agreement on whatever that point of dispute was. It's just frustrating to see this continuing to happen. Now, as they said in that article, the team at Amazon that has been working on this Lord of the Rings MMO for these past few years is now going to be moving on to other projects. Now, you might immediately assume everyone's going to New World, but we actually know that Amazon has another MMO in development. So we learned last year that Amazon's San Diego studio, which is being led by industry veteran John Smedley, were working on a new project. Now, Smedley himself has a career of leading MMO development. He's been involved most notably with EverQuest PlanetSide and DC Universe Online. Now, specifics of what the San Diego development team were working on were kept secret until last year, when we saw a bunch of job postings for various positions with language revealing that they were in fact making a sci-fi based MMO. So besides New World, there's a good chance that the Lord of the Rings team will also be shifting onto this project. I will say that all of this news, it's a bummer. It is a real shame to me that we're not going to be seeing this next gen Lord of the Rings game. We already have a Lord of the Rings MMO with Lord of the Rings Online, and that game seems to be trucking along. In fact, I do believe pretty recently they revealed that there was going to be like a new expansion or update for the game, which is, exciting for fans of that game. But seeing a new big budget Lord of the Rings MMO had me genuinely excited. I know you might say, Force, what are you excited about? Amazon has been doing a terrible job of making games. And yes, that's true. Breakaway, Crucible, the Grand Tour game, everything's been pretty rough. But New World, I think depending on your perspective, actually shines a more positive light on what Amazon's doing or what they could do going forward. Not everybody loves the change in direction from sandbox hardcore PvP into a more theme park style. I get it. It's not for everybody. There was a huge fan base for that initial game mode and that game type. There's also a huge fan base for the direction that they're going. You know, what one could have been more successful? I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller. I'd be a billionaire if I was, but presumably it seems that Amazon is listening to community feedback, to criticism from that preview event that happened last August, and they're adjusting accordingly. Whether or not you like the adjustments they're making, they do seem receptive and are clearly trying to make New World a good game. And I was hopeful, almost regardless of how New World ends up turning out, I was hopeful that this whole process was going to be like building a bedrock of understanding of developing an MMO, and that they would take all of this knowledge and all this experience in the development of New World and bring it into the Lord of the Rings MMO. Now, as I just mentioned, they have another MMO. There's apparently a sci-fi MMO in production at that San Diego Amazon studio. Remember, Amazon is made up of multiple studios. It's either 3 or 4 studio locations scattered around the world. They're all working on different projects, which is why they've developed so many different games and had them fail. But regardless, so yeah, there's a sci-fi MMO in production. We learned this from those job postings. There was specific wordage in there saying they were looking for people to work on a brand new multiplayer sci-fi game, that this was going to be an unannounced massively multiplayer game in a new sci-fi world. It was pretty redundant through all those postings what specifically they were working on. It's also interesting to note that there is a chance that this game is actually going to be an MMO shooter. So back in 2017, shortly after joining Amazon, Smedley did send out a tweet asking people what PC shooter has the best gunplay, and that this question was in reference to the unannounced game that he was working on. So we know where he is. We know they're making a sci-fi MMO, and he was asking about what PC shooter gunplay is the best. You put all that together and it looks like Amazon's San Diego studio is making a sci-fi MMO shooter of sorts, and that sounds pretty cool. That's pretty promising. The other thing that's really so disappointing about this entire situation, beyond the fact that I was looking forward to checking out a new Lord of the Rings MMO, is just when it comes to being a fan of the MMO genre, and this being another game taken off the table that had potential. And by having potential, because obviously we know so little about it, I simply mean that this was a game coming from a studio that was going to have a lot of funding and that was presumably learning lessons through their development of the New World MMO that they would be taking into this new Lord of the Rings MMO. And that in and of itself was exciting, because yes, in the genre, as we talk about time and time again, there's just not a lot of big budget games on the horizon. There's not a ton coming out. I mean, realistically, what are we looking at for games that aren't Kickstarter or crowdfunded games in the MMO space? It's pretty much like we're getting some Western ports of some of the Eastern MMOs like Lost Ark. Certainly that looks good. There's a few others coming out too. But beyond that, on the horizon, most of our games are Kickstarter games and that new Riot MMO, and that's about it. There's just not a lot. So having another one of these games, these high profile games from big companies with lots of money, which means more money to pay artists, designers, developers, everybody, which could result in a better, more polished project, although Amazon has quite failed dramatically up until this point. I guess basically what I'm trying to say is it's just sad to see another potentially big budget MMO just get yanked away. That's happened so many times in the past 10 years, like with Blizzard canceling their Titan project. That's just one example. There's not a lot of love for the genre right now, and I was looking forward, even though they've had a spotty record, I was looking forward to seeing what Amazon was going to be able to do beyond what we're going to see with New World. And this also leaves me wondering, like, what's going to happen, like, there's been apparently years of development of this Lord of the Rings MMO. Is it all for naught? How much of it was controlled specifically by Amazon? How much was in the hands of Athlon Games and Leo Technologies, which are now both owned by Tencent? I don't know if this thing is just dead in the water, if these years of work are just going to get thrown away. It's not unheard of in game development. It happens more frequently than we might know of. I guess it's just not always so public when it takes place. And this is like it seems like a pretty big failure, right? to announce that you're making a Lord of the Rings next gen MMO and then just to scrap that whole thing. As of now, as far as we know, the thing's not going to get made. I hope that changes in the future. Maybe depending on who owns what and who has access to what parts of this game, that they can continue to build it and release it at some point. But as of now, the Lord of the Rings MMO is canceled. What a shame. Just another, whether or not it's entirely their fault, it's another black mark on the name of Amazon Game Studios. It has been a rough road so far, although it's hard to feel bad for Amazon. I think they're doing fine in general. All right, well, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one, all right? Take it easy. Hopefully with better news next time, because it's kind of rough.